It's been a tough week. But it's not just been a tough week, it's been a tough election season. The pain of this season is the separation. There's such a incredibly emotional, painful, fearful separation that is alive, that is being vocalized, that is we just feel the energy of the fear that is being expressed on both sides. Everyone's feeling it. Everyone has their different reasons for feeling that fear. And often what happens when we start to feel fear of other, we start to feel angry because that person can have power over me. That person can hurt me or people that I love or that group. So where do we stand as a spiritual community? Well, I stand with Ernest Holmes. One of the things that I love about Ernest Holmes is that whenever he said a prayer, I can't say all the time, but I read it a lot, and he's speaking a prayer for himself or for someone else, for his good or someone else's good, always, not always, almost always, he spoke it for everybody. He'd say, and all my good, I have all this abundance, and I know that which I have, everybody on this planet has. He never limited his good just for the people that he cared about or for the people that was in his world. It was always for everyone. There's only one life. There's only one power and there's one presence. There is nobody. There is nothing outside of this one life. We do not have the luxury, once we stand in this truth, to allow ourselves to believe that there is someone outside of the divine presence and the divine power. That's how we can come together as a community. And I've had this experience where I mentioned it before when I was in Celebration Center, which was right outside Washington, D.C. I had a community of people with very strong, passionate political beliefs and were involved in the government, Republicans and Democrats, people who were high level, and yet we could all come under the same roof and love one another. Because we knew that the perspectives were all part of this journey that we're on, but underneath was this one power and one presence, and we made that decision to see the wholeness and the perfection in God in everyone, But it's not easy. I think one of the reasons why Jesus was considered one of the master teachers, along with so many, is because he said the hard words. One of the hardest teachings he said was to love our enemies. It's very nice sounding, but it's actually hard to do when you feel afraid of your enemy, when you feel like your enemy can hurt you, or you feel that your enemy is less than. You know, his parables, we've been talking about his parables in our class, and you know, the parable of the Good Samaritan, in his times he was speaking to a Jewish people, and the Samaritans were considered less. They were considered a little unclean. They weren't considered as evolved as the Jewish people. And yet he made the Samaritan the star of his story. He made a prostitute the star of his story. He picked out those that we consider other and made them the star of his story. So one of the questions we were asking in class is, who is the other for you? Who is that other that you would never want to be the star of your story? Like if you're telling a story and you want to show some good quality, who is that other you would never want to resemble because you think they're maybe a little bit less evolved than you, a little bit don't have just as much God in you as you do, or the people that you know? Because this is where the healing happens. The healing doesn't happen by making everybody the same, because that will never happen. The healing happens is by going out, as Rumi said, going out beyond the field of right doing and wrong doing. And I'll meet you there. A few weeks ago or months ago, I can't remember when, I gave you all the purpose of life. You know, it's very easy. You don't ever have to seek it again. This is great. So when you're up here, you got the authority. Here's the truth. The purpose of life is to grow. We are not here to stay the same. And I don't know about you, but I have never really done much growing when life is going really well for me. I'm happy, I'm enjoying it, but I don't necessarily change much. And so we need those times. We need those plateau times. We're really enjoying times. But You ask most of us, when do we really deepen? When do we really grow? And it's when time is challenging. So there must be a place in our country that's ready for this huge division that's happened. This huge wall, this huge feeling of like totally, I mean, it's like even trying to find where it's the common ground. There's so much pain and suffering. So we're ready for this growth. And that's what I believe. I believe that communities like this and that are happening all over this country and world are answered prayer. Because these types of communities are saying, beyond all of our separation, there's one power and one presence. And we stand in that. I am so grateful to know that there's one power and one presence. And that doesn't mean I don't experience duality and challenge. So I want to talk a little bit about duality. I have been reading various theologies for a while, and several of them talk about that's the purpose of this earth, is it's a dualistic earth. That when we really start evolving past duality, we actually can't even vibrate in this body anymore. We need another body. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if we can vibrate past duality and still stay in this body, because it hasn't happened yet. But what I will say is it's a place that's very hard for our imagination to go. Our imagination can conjure up a lot of ideas, but it seems it's really hard for us to conjure up what would life be like without duality, or as the intense duality that we have. And I say that because the thing that has always struck me about science fiction movies, movies about the future, movies that are taking place in the stars, that have aliens, that are just really, really imaginative, they have all the same problems we have now. It's really no different. It's just duality up in the stars or with aliens, but it's still duality. It's good and evil fighting each other. How are we gonna get to a place of peace? It's nothing has actually changed. And I think the reason why we keep telling those stories is because we actually our imagination is so far beyond what we can conceive. And what I've noticed in my own life is that it's when things don't go my way and I can't force it to go my way, that it demands that I go inside. It demands. I have no choice. I have to find something that's beyond what's out of my control. I have to find a truth and a reality that I might have all these nice concepts, but that's not going to get me through it. Concepts aren't going to do it. The concept of oneness isn't going to get us very far. We actually have to have direct contact with it. We have to move past our mind, our mental thinking. Imagination often relies on things that we've thought of before in the past. We have to move past all of that, and we don't do that. That doesn't happen easily until we let go and let go and let go. And often it is pain that forces us to let go. The character, I don't know, I'd love to do a talk on the movie Hurricane sometime. I didn't plan on it, so I didn't watch it again, but it kept coming up. Rubin Hurricane Carter. How many of you are familiar with him? A lot of you, half of you. So there was a movie with Denzel Washington. He was a boxer, and he was in the criminal justice system for quite a long time, and he was jailed. I can't even remember. It's been a long time. I think it's for killing someone. I don't know. And unjustly, Bob Dylan wrote a song to him, The Hurricane. A lot of people were protesting to get him out. Didn't work. The movie was great. We'll talk about it sometime. But the thing that really impacted me was when the movie came out, Larry King was interviewing Rubin Hurricane, eventually got out, was free. And he was interviewing Rubin Hurricane Carter about the movie. And so he was so wonderful and soft and kind. And then Larry King would go, so this was in the late 90s, he would go to clips of Rubin Hurricane being interviewed in the jail, in prison in the 1970s. And I had to go back. I had to wait, that's not the same person. I mean, physically, talk about a body changing. You know, we're talking about new wine, a new wineskin, needs a new bottle. I couldn't even see the physical connection. He was so dramatically, physically different. And his entire persona, when he was being interviewed in the 70s, he was clear, he was articulate, his face was angular and sharp, and he was clear that he was angry at the system, and for good reason. All of it, I'm not saying, and this is what's interesting, he had reason to be angry. He was justified in all of his his anger, in all of his, this is not okay. And he was articulate, and he was smart. And the Rubin hurricane that was being interviewed 20 years later, it was like he had no guile, no agenda. He was just soft. He was just gentle. And I'm like, how does someone get from there to there? And what's interesting is I have this thing about prison movies, because I think so much happens in prisons that we change. And I guess I've, ever since Bo Lozoff talked about this world of duality as a prison. So the reason why I think of it as a metaphor. We are in this dualistic world, and what do we do with it? When you're in this dualistic world, how do we respond to it? Because we can do a lot of things, but I don't think we're going to be able to change duality. I've been in a lot of spiritual communities. There's still duality. There's still challenges. There's still people who get in conflicts. There's still, you can be in a group of people that absolutely believe in oneness, and there's still pain. People still struggle. So what do we do with that? And what happened with Rubin Hurricane Carter, like it happens to Nelson Mandela, it demanded that they go deeper within to a place that we cannot get to just on our human mind. It demands that we touch into that divine presence that does say there is only good. There is only love, that there is no enemy, that there is no other. I am not fighting against anyone. I am only standing in what is true. In the beautiful case of Rubin Hurricane Carter, he couldn't get there on his own. So there were people who said, we stand with you, and we will walk through this journey with you. And he started to believe in himself. And he said, even if I don't get out, you could see the healing that started to happen in him. He didn't even have to leave prison for that healing to happen. And that healing happened because people believed in who he really was. And as he shifted and really started doing that healing and knowing who he really was, the law changed. They saw that he was free, and he was set free as an innocent man. It was interesting because when that movie came out, it was hard for me to watch. Because I was working at Agape, I was on the staff at the time, and I'm like, man, it's so hard for me to believe that our justice system is that, intent on being unfair. And that Reverend Michaels, who is African American, was saying, that was my life growing up. Going to school, regularly stopped by police officers just walking to school. We had a whole protocol of you're supposed to take their name and number down, and my mom told us how to react. And he said, for us, the police were not upholding a system of justice, of freedom. They were other. The system was perceived as other, and they were perceived. And they said, we are perceived as other by the system. And I thought, wow, that's an entirely different worldview. And how painful. And I think of someone like Reverend Michael, and I think of someone like Reverend Nirvana who grew up with him, and how loving they are. They just refuse to get pulled into the game of duality. Reverend Nirvana, over and over, I have seen him stand in unconditional love for all people. Even though he has been the recipient of a lot of racism himself, he stands in love. There are people on our ministers' listserv who have different points of view than he does. And then these battles would come, between the different perspectives. And Nirvana never entered them. He would come in, and for the person who has a very different perspective than he says, I see you, brother. I can hear what you're saying. And he would sort of validate some of the things he says. And let me tell you where I'm coming from. And the whole energy, everything would shift. Suddenly there was communication. There was a bridge. There was compassion and understanding, and he did it over and over and over again, which is why our whole movement was so devastated when he left because of one person. He used to say it all the time, one in God is a majority. When you stand in that absolute presence of love, we will not be moved, and I will not be moved to allow myself to get pulled into otherness, that you're the bad guy over there. I will not. Everyone is the life of God. I stand in that. And when you stand in that over and over, you affect everybody. He affected everybody who came in contact with him. Even people who didn't like him couldn't help but fall in love with him because he wouldn't go there. You don't like me? That's fine. I still love you. He stood. There is nothing more powerful than standing in what we teach. That there is only one power and there is only one presence. And it is absolute, unconditional love for all beings. And, okay, so there's always the mind part of me that I can't dismiss. We stand in who we are. That's what this community is. That's what spiritual communities are doing all over this country today. There's some, what's it called? That Steve Janan's doing, the healing. There's a healing thing happening today online with all these leaders. So spiritual communities are everywhere, are working to know the oneness. But I also have a little part of me that likes complexity. So excuse me for going there for a minute. Because I think some of the illusion can be is that since there's always duality, that there's really nowhere to progress to. So when I was immersed in the agape world for 6 years, 3 of those years I worked there. This is, by the way, I'm sorry, for those of you who don't know, it's a spiritual community that's similar to this one, but much larger, thousands of people down in Los Angeles, and the minister is Michael Beckwith. People used to say to us when I worked on staff there, oh, it must be like heaven working here, because everything is unconditional love. I mean, if you've been to their services, it's so expansive and your heart's wide open and you feel great. And it wasn't. There were constant challenges. Every single day people were complaining and upset about something. There were challenges between the staff and the board, and I mean, all the time there were things happening. And I'm like, heaven? Heck no, this is like, we are in it here. Every single day we're working on it. So I went from that, so I'm thinking, well, this is everywhere. There's no difference. But then I left, and I graduated from ministerial school, and I went to stay with my mom for a while to see where God was calling me for ministry. And I wanted to make some money, so I worked at a daycare center for part-time. And it was such a shock for me, because there was duality there, but it was completely unconscious. And I hadn't worked in an unconscious environment for a really long time. So there was a lot of blaming. There was a lot of very little responsibility, very little understanding of what their own inner dynamics were. And what I recognized was that there was a big difference between being duality that's completely unconscious, that people are just sort of acting out on each other, and duality where I was at Agape, that it was happening at a very conscious level, that people were taking responsibility. Even though egos were there and desires were there, we could talk about it. We had a ground of understanding that, okay, this is really not working, but here's what the principle is. It should be working, so why aren't it? And we get into these discussions, and I'm not saying it's intellectual. There was passion, there was pain, there was suffering, but it was all done with such an understanding that it was all happening inside of us too, that we were taking responsibility for our own journeys, that it wasn't about, you did this to me. I might say, I feel like you're doing this to me. I know that may not be true, but that's what it feels like. So we do want to progress, and that's the other thing I want to say. So we're working on oneness, we're working on wholeness, but we also want to say that there are places that we need to continue to stand in that are more evolved than others. That the more work we do, we still may be suffering duality, but that does not mean we are not more evolved, that we are not doing it at a higher vibrational frequency. And that's the growth. Like I said, we are here to grow. Every one of us is growing right now because of what's happening in our country. Unless you just completely shut it out and are living in a cave, we're impacted. We live in this energy of pain. It's hard for me to even open Facebook because I have friends on both sides. I know what I think, but the passion and the intensity and the anger and the fear, this is the fear that it's just so much fear coming out. I have to shift and say, I know who I am. I know I stand for love. I stand for love for all people, and I will always stand for that. I will always stand for that for all people. And if it means that I have to move out into social action, if I feel like some people's rights are being taken away, if I feel like that some people are no longer going to be treated equally, there is an action I'm going to take, but that action does not come from separation. It's not going to be against anything. It is only for love. It is only for wholeness. It is only for the equal rights of all people. All people, on both sides. I want the highest good for people who seem like they're other. I want their highest good, and I will listen. I think listening is a place where we need to go. I live in an urban city. I posted an article on my Facebook about what it was like to live in a rural area. One of the things that man commented is that suicide rates double as soon as you get out of the urban and move into the rural. That there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of suffering, and there's fear there. Fear is everywhere. Fear is everywhere. We do not help by getting involved in the fear, ever. We will never heal, we will never move to these higher levels if we are responding from fear. Every one of us can be like Reverend Nirvana. One person, one God in a majority. We stand. I will not go to fear. I will only stand for love. I will stand for what I believe in, but not to the point where I need to beat you up. And I don't mean physically, in my mind, in my words, in my language. I will respect and honor you. That's what I kept seeing with Reverend Nirvana when he would get on the minister's listserv, and he did this in person too. He always respected and honored people with different perspectives than him. He didn't put them down. He didn't say, idiot. He treated them as beautiful beings of light and of love. And then he stood what he believed in. That's what we all have the opportunity to do, and that's what I'm grateful for. This is a time of growth. The purpose of life is to grow. We are not here just to hang out and be comfortable and live on the beach and have everything given to us and not have to lift a finger. Actually, it's not very interesting. We like to grow. I mean, it's not only our purpose. I think so many people say the hardest times in their life are also the most fulfilling times. So we're doing this collectively. What a gift. What a gift that we're not just doing this on our own now, that we get to be in these difficult, challenging times together. And we get to discover the truth of love and wholeness and the power and the presence of God together. And we can continue. We say in New Thought often that Jesus is not the exception, but the example. That he was here to walk as a brother, not as some far-off thing that we can't become. He's an example. And as an example, he continued to stand for all beings. And he never, this is where Gandhi got his inspiration, Martin Luther King. He didn't respond in violence. He only responded in love, to the point where he was crucified rather than fight for what he believed in or attack. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. A gentle heart always. He lived it. How gentle is our heart right now? When we're in fear, it's very hard to be gentle, isn't it? We're afraid we're going to be stepped on or walked on or taken advantage of. So I need to make sure I'm ready because I'm going to be taken advantage of. What would happen if we were gentle? What would happen if we were gentle with ourselves? Last week I talked about everything we experience that we're experiencing through ourselves. It's impossible to experience anything other than through ourselves, so we have to always love ourselves. We always have to spend time with ourselves, and that means with our dark side as well. And I was talking about last week, and I wasn't even thinking about the election, that there was this very angry part of me that was coming forth in this ugly image. I couldn't reject that. I had to listen, and by listening and by allowing its voice and giving voice to it, the light within it started to shine. If I had beaten it up, ignored it, repressed it because it was so ugly and so violent, it never could have transformed into a gift. But the gift came from listening. I didn't let it run me. When I worked in a psychiatric hospital, and I'll end with this, because I talk about working in that psychiatric hospital a lot because it was such a beautiful time in my life. I loved working there. But when I started working there, it was a place of darkness. I'd spent a month of silence. I was immersed. There's only one power, one presence. Joel Goldsmith. He's an absolutist. There is nothing other. There's no other power. And anytime you think there's another power, you're an illusion. So I was so immersed in that, and I wanted to serve from there. So I was guided to work in the psychiatric hospital. I cried every single day I went to work for the first 3 weeks. There was so much darkness. People are at the end of their rope there. There are people who are depressed, who want to die. They've had enough. There are people whose minds are not working well. The chemicals are not in alignment, and they're feeling disoriented. There are people who are hearing very dark voices, very dark energy around them, and are speaking from this incredible darkness. There's a lot of darkness in a psychiatric hospital. And yet, I speak about it with joy because I don't think I only realize it in retrospect, But I was so immersed in knowing there's only one power and one presence, that there's all that there is. I was seeing the wholeness and the perfection in everyone. I wasn't getting caught up in all their actions and their anger. And even when I started there for the first 3 weeks, I was crying, but I was still saying, there's only God, there's only God. I go to the bathroom, there's only God, there's only God. God is the only power. There's no other power. All this other stuff has no power. And I stayed there. And I fell in love with almost every person I came in contact with. I fell in love with the patients. I fell in love with the staff. I would go around talking to everybody. People would always ask me, why did I sing so much? I guess I got up and on the whole singing. Because I was immersed in the divine power and the presence of God. That's where the healing happens. And when there was a person who was violent, we didn't just say, oh yeah, you can be violent and do whatever you want. We had to restrain them from hurting themselves and hurting other people. But the whole time we're restraining them, I'm saying, and there the power and the presence of God is. There's a wholeness of power and the presence of God is. We're talking in this class, I talk about demonstration. Well, were there healings? Did knowing the wholeness change their behavior? Once in a while it actually did. There were some miracles that happened there. But often it had no impact. And so we have to remember, as we're going through this as a country, there's a lot of time. There's multiple dimensions and worlds, and I believe from the depths of my being, and I'm not saying I know this, but I believe it, that all of us are going to be returning to God, that all of us are going to wake up, but it takes a long time. And so all those prayers of knowing the wholeness and the perfection in somebody may not show up in this lifetime, but it will show up. I was talking about this movie, The Cloud Atlas, that came out, which takes a long view of history, and it shows people getting reincarnated. I didn't particularly like a lot of the individual stories, but it's powerful because you see people who were very, in one lifetime, cruel, unconscious, but over time, they start developing consciousness. One of the things we get attached to is if I'm praying for wholeness and perfection and I'm not seeing that result in that person, it's not working. I just said with Rubin Hurricane Carter, remember that he physically looked different? That it's almost like he changed bodies? Sri Aurobindo says that we have to actually change bodies. That our bodies as we are in them cannot stay the same if we change inside. So there are some people who can't change. They're so stuck in their body that in that moment they can't change. We're praying for them, but all those prayers will have an impact. When they leave that body, we keep praying and knowing the wholeness and the perfection. I absolutely believe, but do not know, but I believe that ultimately it has an impact. That everyone has the beauty and the presence and the eternal soul of God. And that's what I choose to focus my attention on now, in this time and in this place, for all people, regardless of what the results are, regardless if they don't show up the way I think they should. I get to choose what I'm grateful for. And what I'm grateful for is that God is the only power and the only presence of my life. And that is all that I live for. And that's all that I choose to see. And that is all the place from which I choose to act. That is my power and that is my strength. And I invite all of us as a community to stand in that power. There's only one power, only one presence. It is good. It is good where there is no other, where there is no opposite. It is always good. The entire universe is for all of its creation to thrive, to be joyful, to be free, to be loving, to be happy. This is the highest possibility, and that's where I stand. And let us go into prayer as we